Welcome to yet another edition of the brand called You. Um, we bring some really interesting guests who share their experiences, who talk about their lives, and of course, impart lots of wisdom. Today, we have a good friend, a person who I call a quintessential entrepreneur, Prajakt Raut, with us. Prajakt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. This is such a rare honor to be sitting in front of you and having this conversation.
Thank you so much. You know, you became an entrepreneur when you were 17 years old, and then you worked in a couple of companies. Then you started your own company called Orange Cross. You exited from Orange Cross. You now got Applyifi. You got the Growth Labs. Your mission is to support 100,000 entrepreneurs. You are an author of a book on startup and fundraising. You mentor so many people. Talk to us a little bit about your journey and what you're doing.
Yeah. So promoting entrepreneurship is a personal passion because I believe that unless we create entrepreneurs or unless we create job creators in the country, we will have a big problem as a country. Especially if you see now with artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and all of that taking away large swaths of jobs, large chunks of jobs. Especially in countries like India, which depended on things like factories and BPOs and all these large, things that sucked up a lot of unemployed youth in job creation. Those things going away, self-employment is going to be is something that the government as well as the country needs to really focus on. And that is the reason why for a long time I've been focusing on promoting entrepreneurship or creating job creators as something as a passion. In the course of my journey, I started my first business when I was 17 years old. My father was a small businessman. He passed away quite early. And then as a way of getting into working life, I started with a small printing business. When I was about 20 years old, a few of my friends joined the advertising industry, and I thought that was an interesting business to be in. And I said, okay, let me go and figure out what it is about. I joined a small agency to understand what it is like, and that was my first big lesson in life. Because my understanding of business was so naive and was so raw and rudimentary that when I stepped into an office and I looked at what an organization is about and what it takes to really make things work, I decided to take a step back and say, okay, let me spend a few years in understanding how business works and then start something of my own. I think that turned out to be a sensible decision. I worked for about 10 years in different kinds of advertising agencies.
So, what was your first learning that you said that you must get prior experience before starting?
No, I think prior experience, we'll come to that. I think experience is useful, but not necessarily, but not necessarily a necessary thing, and that. Since we're talking about that, a lot of entrepreneurs ask me, or a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs ask me in terms of, should I start directly out of college or should I get an experience first? And my answer to them is, look, if you have an idea that you know is going to really work, if you have the conviction and you have an understanding of how the business around that works, by all means go ahead and try it out and learn on the way. But if you don't have an idea and you just have the thought of being an entrepreneur, then it might be wiser to just go out and spend some time in different kinds of organizations to get that experience. But my biggest experience in when I went into a job for the first time is that I understood the sheer complexity of what it takes to what seems very simple from the outside to get done. As somebody who had seen advertising agencies from the outside, I said, okay, maybe there's somebody who writes, somebody who draws stuff, and then the ad goes on. But then when I realized that it takes so many months to really strategize, to debate, it takes several different kinds of departments to really make this work. And there's something called processes, there's something called technology that binds all of that together. Those were things that made me think that, look, I know nothing about what business is about, and it might help to really get a little better understanding of this beforehand.
So what are these two companies that are you currently doing, Applyifi and the Growth Labs?
See, everything that I've done largely revolves around my passion for supporting entrepreneurship. Before I started Applyifi, I was the head of operations of the Indian Angel Network, and before that, I had taken the 3 year sabbatical to run the Asia office of TIE. Now, TIE, as you would know, is one of the largest organizations in the world, which is whose mission is to foster entrepreneurship, and they do that by it's a platform where successful and accomplished entrepreneurs spend time with upcoming entrepreneurs and help them in sort of with the lessons that they've learned on the way, so that people don't have to go through the rough and tumble that other people may have already sort of gone on that way. That was those 3 years were a phenomenal learning experience in understanding of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And then I got back when I was heading the Indian Angel Network. I realized that we used to get about 1,000+ applications every month, about 10-12,000 applications every year. 80% of those or significantly larger number of applications were businesses that may have the understanding of or may have the potential of being a good business, or concepts that would have the potential of being a good business, but the articulation of that idea, how to present it, how to pitch it, etc., was completely lacking. I mean, people would go on talking about the idea, but without understanding how the business around that was going to be built, what the revenue model was, what the business model was, commercials, etc. And it wasn't because these people were stupid. It was only because nobody had taught them or explained to them that this is how you think about a business and stuff. And therefore, when I started Applyifi, it started with a scorecard which gave entrepreneurs a very detailed, thorough analysis of or an assessment of various aspects about but the foundational aspects about the business. It gave startup founders very actionable insights in terms of what they could do to strengthen the business. So that's what Applyifi is about.
Okay.
We are not an investment banker, we are not a funding agency, we are certainly not investors. All we do is help entrepreneurs fine-tune their business plans, build stronger foundations for the business, and help them help them think through how they're going to build that business. That's all we do.
So if I'm a budding entrepreneur, I can reach out to Applyifi and say, can you help me build a business plan?
Yeah. So
or if I have a business plan, I can come and say, can you vet the business plan?
Yeah. So everybody has a business plan, in the sense they may not have an Excel sheet, they may not have a PowerPoint, but they have some idea in terms of what they want to do, etc. onto it. They may not have built all the aspects around it. What we help them do is think through all the necessary elements and all the foundational block. A lot of times, much like I was in my earlier job, most entrepreneurs don't have an understanding of the complexity and therefore the underlying cost structures that would be required in making this work. And as a result, their view about how this is going to get implemented is very simplistic. All we do is bring a more experienced perspective to that entire thing, and we help them think through their own businesses.
I see.
It's not that we write a business plan for them. Nobody can. We describe our role as say a gym instructor. I can tell you what to do, but I can't run for you on the treadmill. And that's typically what we help people do.
Okay. And what about the Growth Labs?
So, because we work with a large number of startups, we typically work with about 1,000+ startups every year. Just this year, for example, with the program that we are running for the Rajasthan government, we work with about 650 startups there itself. Because we have access to a large number of startups, many of them are very good across different sectors and stuff like that. We started the Growth Labs, where we work with large companies, manufacturing companies, auto companies, pharma companies, typically the traditional old world companies, etc., who now have recognized the need for looking for innovation outside of their companies. And these are companies, they recognize that some of that innovation will come from startups, but they are not necessarily as geared up for handling the startups. So at the Growth Labs, we help large companies manage their innovation and startup engagement programs. Right from helping them define what are the kind of things that they might be able to benefit from, going out and then finding these companies, shortlisting, and then really actually taking them into into projects.
And so it would be more of a focus on technology alone.
Not really. Technology is one component of it, but there are several. Yes, I mean by design, a number of companies that apply to Applyifi happen to be technology enabled, but not necessarily everything is a technology company. There could be companies.
So if a simple brick and mortar idea that I have,
Yeah.
I come to you first and say I want to set up a retail chain,
Yes,
like a modern kirana shop.
sure.
What do you think of my business plan? And you help me do that. And once that is done, and I've got say 5 or 6 stores,
Sure.
then I come to the growth labs. Would that be how?
No. So our customer for Applyifi and Growth Labs is different. In Applyifi, our customer or the key stakeholder is the startup, and in the Growth Labs, our customer is the corporate. So the corporate defines a problem statement, or we help the corporate define a problem statement or an opportunity area, and then on the basis of that, we will. So, for example, for a large auto company, their thing was, how do we improve our marketing in rural areas, including access to capital, allowing people access to capital. Now, this wasn't a solution. We say, okay, let's go out and find one company that is doing everything. We had to stitch together a solution with a combination of 7 different companies, one in face recognition, one in Aadhaar enabled, KYC, one in peer-to-peer lending, one in institutional lending, and the other putting together the entire program that would do, which will allow sort of individuals to be distributors or dealers for that company, versus say, for example, a traditional, what should you say, brick and mortar car showroom. More importantly, to improve the selling of those vehicles in rural areas, you have to improve the the after sales service network as well. And therefore we had a company which would do AR VR to be able to support a local mechanic to service this car, which has, as a result of which, the access to those vehicles etc. become better in those villages. So that's typically what we would do. We would look at a problem statement and put together the kind of solutions that would be required, identify the right startups and get them into a model that would make sense for everyone.
I understand. So tell me a little bit about startups in India. Our government has been promoting Startup India, and the general sense of everyone seems to be very upbeat.
Sure.
What is your experience?
No, I think entrepreneurship is something that has been in India for a long time. We just used to call them businessmen. I'm a little concerned about the use of the word startups in the way it is being used right now. Unfortunately, in India, our definition of startups is a very VC-defined definition of startups, which is technology-enabled companies that will scale up massively, and they could either fail or they could succeed and give investors a blowout return. And while that is one version of entrepreneurship, that certainly shouldn't be India's definition of what startups is. The Startup India definition is technology-enabled companies that are innovation-led, and I ask why? Why does it have to be technology-enabled? Why does it have to be innovation-led? Can't I, say, for example, a Chayos is a great example of taking a real. Of course, it is technology-enabled in some ways or the other for efficiency, but it's not a technology business. And I think it's important that in India we redefine the definition of startups to any legitimate business that the entrepreneur wishes to do or is excited about doing, to the extent of his aspirations and capabilities. There's no reason to be a $1 billion company. There's no reason to be a $10 million company. If I'm happy making a few lakhs every month, so be it. That should be considered startups as well. But that said, and that keeps on happening, in the sense there are several businesses that keep. We call them SMEs or we call them MSMEs and stuff like that. But within the so-called startup world, which is the technology-enabled, scalable model world and stuff like that, what's encouraging is a lot more people in colleges and younger people are thinking about entrepreneurship as a possible career option. A bunch of reasons for that. One is there is much better access to capital. There's a lot of, whether it's very early stages or whether it's at every stage of the journey, capital availability is a lot better than what it was even, say, about 5 years ago, forget 10, 15 years ago. But the second most important thing is that attempting an own business has become democratized. The 20 years ago, to start a business, you needed a large amount of capital to start off with, because you needed to create a website that would cost a few lakhs. You needed an office, you needed people, you needed everything was expensive, and the only medium of your sort of advertising was radio and television, but required larger budgets. Now, with all of these cost structures being on, freelancers available, co-working spaces available, online platforms on which you can quickly put up websites, social media marketing which allows you to test these concepts. All of that is good. And but the biggest factor in my mind for a lot of people attempting entrepreneurship is because there is a societal acceptance of failure, which earlier was a big negative for even the families to accept. पता नहीं fail हो गया तो नहीं चला तो क्या होगा, वो क्या कहेंगे, and all of that is gone. It's perfectly all right now to say, okay, we attempted, it didn't work out.
In fact, that is so well said. I was just going to ask you this question, and you all answered it. When I was growing up, you needed to be. I mean, there was no concept of SMEs and MSMEs.
Right.
They were industrialists.
Right. That's correct. Yeah.
And only those industrialists had the capability to allow their family members or their trusted members to be able to start new businesses.
Or you were a small kirana
Large capital
shop
was
trader.
needed, or you were a small kirana shop. That was on the one side, but as you said, societal acceptance is there. I think today's parents are much more willing to allow their children to take a risk of doing something on their own than it was earlier.
Yeah, because we have role models that have become aspirational, etc. There have been examples of people who've done modestly well, or even not done well, but have stumbled and got back again and done onto something. And in fact, that's one of the things that I tell parents who come sometimes worried in terms of saying, my child is doing something, is it okay and not okay? And I tell to do one simple exercise. Find a list of 100 companies that have failed in the last 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. Go to the LinkedIn profiles of those founders and figure out and tell me one person who's struggling today. In fact, even from a corporate and industry point of view, two people being the same, one with every other experience being the same, but one with an entrepreneurial experience is much likely to be preferred, because that person has a slightly broader view about business rather than somebody who's not had that exposure.
Very true. So you are spending a lot of time on startups, and you also help startups get funding. A few questions of you on this. Now, first one is, when should I, as a startup entrepreneur, look for funding? I mean, we keep hearing talks of bootstrapping your startup and so on.
So I tell people that you should look for funding when you need it, and that could be at any point of time. It could be when you're at an idea stage. It could be when you've got a minimum viable product, MVP as they call it, or you've done some tests and pilots in that market and stuff. But a lot of unfortunately, what has happened is that many aspiring entrepreneurs think that the first step to entrepreneurship is seeking funding, and that is almost always wrong. If you have clarity in terms of saying that, look, this is what I want to do, here's how I'm going to be able to do it. At every stage of that journey, there are different kinds of investors available. So if all you have is an idea and a few thoughts around how this is going to be done, then there are lots of accelerators and incubators who will provide you anywhere between 10 lakhs to 50 lakhs that is required to take that concept off the ground. They also help you build a foundational building blocks of that business. When you got past that, when you need say anywhere between 50 lakhs to a couple of crores, there are either individual angel investors, lots of them available through various platforms, or angel investor networks that are available, and then beyond that there are institutional investors and stuff. So the simple answer to that question is that go seek capital whenever you need it, but only if you need it. But before that, get clarity in terms of what you need to do, or at least clarity in terms of what you don't know, so that you can find an investor who will help you.
So what would your advice be to an entrepreneur who a young person who has decided he or she wants to be an entrepreneur? What would it be that first build your business and seek valuation, or build your business only to seek valuation?
No, build your business only to seek valuation never works. It has never worked for anybody else. valuation is a factor of the value that you create in that business and what value somebody else attributes to the entire. You can't sort of build a business saying that, look, I want to be $1 billion valuation, and how will that market work? And the reason is simple, because you know anybody who starts business with an opportunistic point of view will almost always fail, because no business will go in that hockey stick direction in one way. There will be ups and downs in between. Unless you start a business with something that you have the conviction in, something that you're passionate about, you will not have the tenacity to last through the first upheavals. And therefore say that, look, आजकल healthcare चल रहा है, आजकल fintech चल रहा है, उसमें कुछ करके मैं $1 billion करता हूँ. It will never work, because you'll give up, because it's not something that's in your passion. And our media has projected a lot of these overnight successes and all that, but what most people don't recognize is that it takes a decade to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
It's not a journey. You recognize even the Flipkarts of the world and stuff like that. A 10-15-year-old journey is not a yesterday's story.
Very true. Very true. And when you are looking to raise money, even if it's on a very small scale, what is the importance of agreements, and how important is it to
No, they are
understand
important.
everything?
Absolutely. I mean, any kind of agreement in business is extremely important. But I'd see that entrepreneurs tend to worry a lot more than they should, and not. I'm not saying that they should be casual about it, but as the ecosystem matures, I've seen that the investors also have, a lot of the agreements that you see across angel investor groups or institutional investors, certainly if institutional investors, as well as the networks, are very founder friendly. Unless you're dealing with somebody who intends to sort of create trouble, it's unlikely that you will have that. But there are certain things that you sort of need to watch out for. There are basically two areas on which you need to be careful. What is the control that you're giving to somebody else, and what is the dilution that is happening on that?
I understand. So when you're starting up, what are the advantages and disadvantages of getting a partner?
I cannot underscore the importance of having somebody as a co-traveler within that journey, whether that person is a partner or somebody who's supporting. And the reason is because it balances the team with a variety of other skill sets and stuff like that. But more importantly, entrepreneurship can be an extremely draining and stressful journey, more than any in the job and stuff, because typically when you start off in an entrepreneurial journey, you have this whole vision about saying how this is going to be so successful and how this is going to be great, and you have literally seen that film in your mind in terms of this going in almost and as you take the steps, you realize that it doesn't work that way. There are lots of stumbling blocks, etc., which you may have sort of thought about, but your optimism really takes you away from those thoughts. And as you go through that ups and downs that you face, it can be emotionally, physically, financially very straining, and it becomes extremely easy if you don't have somebody to egg you along with and say, "Okay, let's give it a shot," to give up. The reason why I'm saying that it is important, it is a very useful thing to have, is because you will see that a lot of single founders tend to give up a lot earlier in the challenges than people who've got.
That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. So I've seen you work, 20 hours a day, and I see, you are much more relaxed today. How do you manage your work-life balance?
Different phases of life. There was a phase in life where things were very rough financially. The Orange Cross, we had a vision of what we would be able to achieve. Obviously, the market didn't behave at that point of time in the way we had expected to. That phase of 5 or 6 years was very rough, and therefore you were putting in a lot more effort. And after that, because you had gone through a very long, sort of downside, you were putting a lot more effort to really get back to a level where life can, sort of the stability could bring it. But I think as you grow and in all ways, in age as well as sort of maturity and financial stability and all that, your priorities change. I have a 15-year-old daughter, 16 now, 15 and a half, if that's what she had asked me to do. But so I've got 2 years with her before she goes off to college, and I don't know where. So my priority in life for the last 1 year and for the next 2 years is optimizing time with her. So I try to make my assignments in a way that I'm typically able to get back home at around 4:35 and able to spend some time with her. After she goes back to college, I'll get my life back again, and then I'll figure out what, sort of how to
Step on the gas again.
step in the gas.
Okay. So one question I love to ask all my guests is, and I want you to be as vulnerable as you possibly can, is what is your biggest learning from your biggest failure, or what are your learnings from your failures?
Lots of learnings within the entire thing, especially if I break them into personal and sort of professional things. The professional part of the learning, and of course, every failure will teach you different things depending on the circumstances that that you went through. On the Orange Cross side, for example, one of my biggest learnings was to give every business model enough time to mature and see before making rapid adjustments. One of the things that you hear often is, oh, the biggest advantage of a startup is that you can be nimble and you can change direction and stuff. And sometimes overdoing that can be can misfire in different ways as well, and that was a biggest learning. The second learning that I had in Orange Cross, and it was a very rude one, that when a customer says that yes, I like it and I will buy, does not necessarily mean he will buy. There's a big difference between getting a expression of interest and the person using it. And it may not be because your product is stupid or bad or wrong, but because there would be several other other circumstances. It could be either priorities, or it could be organizational change that needs to get done and stuff like that.
And I guess the third one would be also that if he buys it, not necessarily that he will pay for it.
That's right. I mean, over a period, the belief is that if they see value, they should pay for it. So if somebody is refusing to pay for it, either it's in a competitive market where 200 other people are offering the same value proposition and you're not in any position to bargain, or the value proposition is not strong enough for that person to consider paying you for it, in which case you need to rethink on that. But on the personal side, I think, my learnings were that important to be extremely positive, because there's one insight which a friend had told me at one point of time, and I think that has stood me in good stead, which I keep on telling my daughter as well. Always remember in life, wo din nahi rahe to ye bhi nahi rahenge. So when you're on a low, remember that even these days will come, and if you think that you're becoming successful and stuff like that, be careful, because even these days will pass by.
That's well said.
The other thing that I picked up from people like you, Praveen Gandhi, Sridhar, who were our initial mentors and investors, is the incredible value of being just a nice person. Being nice to people, being transparent, being honest, being sort of just nice, is an incredibly satisfying thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's well said. In fact, I would add to that a little bit to say that culturally, I think Indian management is very different from the, and I'm going to stick my neck out on this one, the over-aggressive American style of functioning.
Yes.
I think we as Indians tend to relate much more as human beings and empathize much more.
Yes. I think the American, and because I worked in advertising with large multinational companies, the biggest, and versus say for example Indian companies, the biggest difference that I see is that American companies tend to rely a lot more on processes, and in some ways it's dumbing down of the second rung and the third rung and the fourth rung, where somebody makes a decision and there's a process and everybody follows within that entire thing. The Indian approach is a lot more entrepreneurial, and when you say that it's a little more human, etc., it means that you don't have a blind sort of adherence to just processes, but there is way of experimenting. There's certainly going to be, for example, if a reason why ICICI Bank, for example, it creates a lot more entrepreneurs within their ranks than, say, for example, an Amex or
Yeah.
Citi does. You
Yeah.
don't hear about
Yeah.
as many entrepreneurial successes as you do in.
So, Project, last question. We've already spoken a lot about startups and entrepreneurs and how they should build their business plan, and I sincerely hope a lot of people who are watching this will come to Applyifi and to the growth labs. But what would your advice be to a startup entrepreneur?
Focus on the value proposition. Don't focus on what is trending at this point of time. Find something that you're really passionate about, because at the end of the day, even if you're successful in something that you're not passionate about, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really. I mean, do something that you're excited about doing. And a lot of young entrepreneurs don't seem to understand or recognize the value of this simple thing at early stages. And I tell entrepreneurs that it is extremely important for you to first figure out what that value proposition is going to be for what customer, and then build a product around it. Identify that problem or the opportunity, and then think of the solutions rather than starting off with the solution and going around it. The other thing that I would advise entrepreneurs is that there is a big difference between building a product and building a business around that product. A lot of people tend to think of the idea as the business, and that idea is just the starting point. In fact, I tell people that a good idea, and I'm going to stick my neck out onto this, a good idea is neither a necessary condition for success of a business, and most certainly not a sufficient condition for success of a business. A mediocre idea, or a something that has already been tried before, executed well, will have a much better chance of building a business than something that is just an idea without the other. And the last point would be, don't get enamored by the fluff that you see around in terms of valuations and this, that, etc. It doesn't matter. Just focus on building a strong business. Everything else will flow from there.
So your unicorn and indicorn will happen if you have a strong business.
It will. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, these are outliers, and if you want to bet your life on being an outlier, so be it. But it doesn't have to be. Be happy in whatever you do. Most importantly, enjoy it. Be a good person. Be a good person to everyone, to all the stakeholders, and just be happy.
Thank you very much, Prajakt, for coming on the show. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will benefit from Prajakt's incredible wisdom that you have shared with us today. So I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You podcast. Be sure to visit tbcy.in to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover fantastic bonus content. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Simply search for The Brand Called You. Thank you, and see you next week.